instead of bypass surgery, he essentially locked them in a hotel room and had a guy come by and say, you're exercising, you're going to eat the 3 meals I give you, and you're going to quit smoking. And at the end of 6 weeks, the initial group was only 8 people. At the end of the 8 weeks, none of those 8 people needed bypass surgery. Well, the medical community said, whatever, it was only 8 people. You probably got there by luck. Believe it or not, Dr. Ornish, at the time he did that study, was a medical student. And so, of course, he did not get much credibility amongst his peers because he was a medical student. So he said, I'll show you. So he graduates med school, he goes through his residency and training, he gets out, he repeats the study with, not only repeats it, he approached it with a larger number of patients, but then he added the component of doing heart caths and angiograms on them. So now all of a sudden we have this visual evidence, right? So I do a heart cath on you, I see a blockage, we're like, ooh, you're gonna have a heart attack, you need a bypass surgery. Dr. Ornish said, no, you don't, you need to do this stuff. They did that stuff. 8 weeks later, they cath them again, and that blockage is now opened back up again. So is it 100% of people? No, it's not. But it also says that your mindset shouldn't be blockage bypass surgery. Right? And then again, physical inactivity correlates very highly with stroke for people who are inactive. What does activity do though, right? So physical activity throughout life and in later life is associated with a lower risk for Alzheimer's disease. If we talk, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but if we want to talk about preventing Alzheimer's and or other forms of dementia, there are 2 things: physical activity and good sleep. Diet is in there, but it's a third. It's a distant third. Sleep and physical activity are your 2 dementia preventing tools. Higher baseline aerobic fitness was related to higher levels of working memory and attention. One of the fitness crazes in my generation is, I want a walking desk, and so they get a little walking treadmill while they do their little stuff. Hey, you know what? We're not in a country right now where we've got a major problem with inactivity and obesity. Whatever it takes, right? That's what it takes. That's what you do. And then aerobic physical activity is positively associated with cognition, academic achievement, and psychological functioning outcomes. So this doesn't relate to our talk. Well, it does. It doesn't. So, you know, our kids right now, what do? Well, we feed them tons of drugs for this ADD thing, right? And they have done studies that daily exercise of 30 minutes in duration is as effective as ADD meds for kids. So what have we done as a society? We've cut PE out of schools, right? So we've gone the other way. But there's every kid we start on ADD meds, we give them a book, and it's called Living with ADD, and it talks to them about taking away crappy foods. It talks to them about exercising on a regular daily basis. It talks about limiting screen time. And parents come back, and you know what they do? They keep feeding them Cokes. They keep giving them 4 hours of screen time. And if you're doing 4 hours of screen time, you're probably not doing any exercise, right? And they're like, well, we just need to up the dose of the medication.
Is the book called Living with ADD?
Living with ADHD.
ADHD.
Yeah, and I don't remember the author, but I can find it for you.
Yeah.
I don't remember it off the top of my head. All right, so why does this work? So it's one thing, right? You guys can Google everything I've talked to you up to now, right? So digging into why does this actually work? So we have a chemical in our brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it is important in shaping our brains throughout the course of our life. So when I was in medical school, there's a term called neuroplasticity, and it basically says you can change your brain for whatever you want to do. When I was in medical school, when you were 25, your brain was done, right? There was no more neuroplasticity. You were locked in like concrete. We have since learned that that's not the case at all. You can change your brain, and you can change that plasticity over the course of your life. Now, yes, at 25, it is much easier to do it than it is at 85, but you still can do it. In Dr. Deutsch's book, The Brain's Way of Healing, he goes through cases of people. His first chapter is on Parkinson's, and he goes through a guy that was in his late 60s, developed dysfunctioning Parkinson's disease, and he went into a medical library, scoured the research, and basically retrained his brain to walk. And he worked on it so hard, so diligently that he was non-functional, meaning in a wheelchair, and a year later he was walking normally.
Yeah, I read
So-
that book, and then I read a book because of that around vision,
Mhm.
and they're saying you can actually fix
Strabismus. You can also fix, supposedly you can fix presbyopia, right? Just the normal old age, we need glasses,
Yeah.
supposedly you can fix
Yeah, yeah.
that, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's, so it's there. And so that chemical that helps us to reshape the brain is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If we feed the brain correctly and we exercise it correctly, we have more brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There's a thing called microRNAs. So we know the term DNA. RNA is a cousin to it. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. So they're both little codes that code our genes, and the microRNAs do that. And they're involved with our brain forming new brain cells, which we used to think we couldn't do. In taking those neurons, and if your brain says, well, I need a new neuron to go to your foot because you had back surgery and the old ones aren't working, that's what the microRNAs do. And then while we are developing our brain, it's involved with plasticity to change. There's mitochondrial biogenesis. So the mitochondria are a component of every cell in the body, and the mitochondria are what generate all of the energy. So we take blood sugar, we funnel it into a cell, and the mitochondria turns it into what we call ATP, which is energy. Muscles and myokines. So this is how exercise does it. Myokines are, when we exercise, we release chemicals into the blood that go to the brain to signal different things, but one of those is for the brain to heal, morph, change, modulate. So and then it also does it outside the brain as well. Lactate's a fuel. So now if you work out a lot, you know lactate is what makes your muscles sore after you work out. That's actually technically lactic acid. Lactate though and lactic acid are basically just one's an ion, one's not. But we can use lactate in the brain as a fuel source. So when we run out of the normal ATP energy, our brain has a way of switching and using lactate for that as well. Down below you see the potentiation of the endocannabinoid receptors. So our brain has what are called cannabinoid receptors. If you Google that right now, you come across tons of marijuana stuff, right? Because that's what marijuana does, it triggers cannabinoid receptors. Mm-hmm. But the cannabinoid receptors that exist in all of our brains don't know what you're putting in to trigger it. It just knows it gets triggered by something, right? So yes, you can do it with marijuana, but you can also do it with a lot of other things, including exercise. So when we exercise, we release endorphins that trigger that same system. And it's positively, inversely related to anxiety and depression. That's why if you've ever been depressed, everyone's like, go exercise, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of hard to do. If you've ever been in a good depression before, you're like, I don't want to do anything. Somebody says go exercise, like, I just told you I don't want to do anything, right? But if we can get people motivated to do it, it fixes it. And it can do it as well as medications can. And then the last thing exercise does, and it does it, so these bottom two are outside the brain that then go into the brain. All these other ones are in the brain itself. But exercise reduces markers of inflammation. So again, if you've done one of the annual wellness exams with me, we cover myeloperoxidase, we cover CRP, we cover TMAO, and we cover ADMA. Those are all inflammatory markers. And what happens is when we exercise, we have these little pumps in our muscle. And we exercise, we break stuff down, that gets metabolized. Those metabolites have a method to get funneled out, but they also have a method to gum up the system. So what our muscles do in response to that is the ones that don't get funneled out and start to gum up the system, they have a little pump that draws them in and pushes them out. And that is, there's an inflammatory component to that. Well, the more we exercise, the more we train our muscles to have more of those little pumps to get rid of crud. All right, nutrition. I think everybody intuitively knows that eating better is going to be correlated with it, but we'll talk a little bit about why.